Citizens speak out. People in countries such as Afghanistan, Bahrain, Bangladesh, France, Israel, Libya, Morocco, Sudan, Syria, US, and Yemen continue in their steadfast pursuit of better lives for themselves and others as they gather to speak up for government change that brings greater freedom and opportunities for all.
In Bahrain, trials began on Monday, June 6th, for the 47 doctors and nurses accused of trying to overthrow the government by treating injured protesters. As the professionals were allowed to visit with their families for the first time since they were detained, they said that they had been subjected to physical and psychological torture to sign untrue confessions. After Formula One's world management voted to reinstate the Bahrain F1 Grand Prix based on the understanding that the country was returning to stability, President Jean Todt pledged to continue monitoring the situation, while Australian F1 driver Mark Webber called for the race to be cancelled on the grounds that human rights are not being respected.
Moroccans peacefully protested in Casablanca and Rabat Sunday as riot police allowed over 60,000 people to gather unhindered in calls for an end to government corruption and repression.
Following efforts by Saudi women to vote in the upcoming municipal elections, the country's advisory Shura Council announced women should be allowed to vote and run as candidates in future elections, but not for the one currently being organised.
With estimates that up to 40 people have been killed over the past 3 weeks as Israeli military used live ammunition against unarmed citizens in Syria protesting along the ceasefire line of the Golan Heights, UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon called for maximum restraint on both sides of the border to preserve a long-term ceasefire. UN Human Rights Chief Navi Pillay also stated she was deeply troubled by the incidents and urged for impartial investigations to be conducted by both governments.
The UN reports that thousands of people have fled the violence in Sudan South Kordofan state as troops from the north clash with armed groups with allegiance to the south, leaving 4 soldiers and 2 civilians dead.
Minority groups in Bangladesh held a day-long strike Sunday to protest efforts by the government to amend the constitution that would allow it to remain in power longer.
Syrian state television reported on Monday that in Jisr al-Shagur, a large-scale clash between armed men and Syrian forces resulted in the death of more than 120 security force members. According to accounts by some residents, however, the dead officers had refused to open fire on citizens and were instead killed by their colleagues. In fear of further violence, thousands of people fled across the border to neighbouring Turkey as the government announced that tank reinforcements were being sent to the town.
On Tuesday, British Foreign Secretary William Hague stated that the UK is among several UN Security Council members currently drafting a resolution that speaks out against violent crackdowns on protesters in Syria, saying that President Bashar al-Assad is losing legitimacy as a leader and must either reform or step aside. As Libyan revolutionaries seized the town of Afrin Monday, Reuters news agency reported that security forces loyal to Colonel Muammar Gaddafi fired rockets in the town of Ajdabiya. More explosions shook the capital Tripoli Tuesday night into early Wednesday as airstrikes continued by the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, on locations like government military installations. Reporting progress in the operations, U.S. President Barack Obama also stated after a meeting with German Chancellor Angela Merkel on Tuesday that pressure on Libyan leader Colonel Muammar Gaddafi would only continue to increase until he steps down. Also on Tuesday, the European Union increased Libyan sanctions even further, making it illegal for European-operated ships to do business with port authorities of Tripoli and 5 other port cities. Meeting with activists in Libya's Benghazi, Russian envoy Mikhail Margolov conveyed his country's readiness to provide financial support as he encouraged diplomatic resolution of the conflict. Meanwhile, Libyan Labor Minister Al-Amin Manfour joined the growing list of defecting officials as the Tunisian government reported on Tuesday that within the past 24 hours, over 6,800 refugees had fled Libya's violence into neighboring Tunisia.
In Yemen, with President Ali Abdullah Saleh absent as he recovers from injuries in Saudi Arabia, US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton strongly urged Monday for an immediate transition to democratic power for the Yemeni people's best interests. Yemeni protesters rallied, again calling for President Saleh's quick resignation.
Diplomats reported that his wounds were serious, with burns over 40% of his body, including his face.
On Tuesday, in a separate incident, armed men clashed with security forces in the city of Zinjibar, resulting in the deaths of 15 people, including Yemeni soldiers.
Meanwhile, about 2,000 protesters in Sana'a gathered to call for the immediate creation of an interim council headed by Yemeni Vice President Abdul Rabu Mansour Hadi. A group of activists also offered to talk with Vice President Hadi about the transition toward a new government.
Saddened by the tragic loss and oppression of human human lives, we pray for the conflicts in these and all nations to end, and that people everywhere may decide to coexist side by side in peaceful dignity and freedom.